The dragons of D&D come in many and varied forms. Indeed, it would seem that there are a nearly endless number of draconic categories. For every color, every metal, every environment, and every celestial body there is, a dragon is named for it. Primordial dragons, catastrophe dragons, time dragons, planar dragons, mist dragons, moon dragons, solar dragons. The list goes on and on. But among the seemingly infinite variety of dragons within the game of Dungeons and Dragons are what are known as the true dragons, the most numerous of dragonkind, the direct descendants of the very gods of dragons, and the ones who inherited their parents' most iconic abilities. These dragons are the ones unchanged and uninfluenced by outside forces and powers. The metallic, chromatic, and gem dragons. We have covered both the evil chromatic dragons born of Tiamat and the good metallic dragons born of Bahamut to a reasonable extent, though I do intend to cover each individual dragon type in their own episodes in greater detail. These dragons are the most widely known and encountered, standing in opposition of each other and attempting to spread the influence of their patron deity or of their own beliefs across the planes. But the third major category of true dragons, the gem dragons, require their own episode separate from the general lore of dragons episode. Equal in power and prowess to their metallic and chromatic cousins, gem dragons, typically neutral in alignment, divorce themselves from the conflict between good and evil completely. Gem dragons tend to be aloof, solitary, and according to sources, self-centered, though I think self-interested is a more accurate adjective to describe them. Their scales are crystalline. Their powers are psionic instead of arcane. Their breath weapons are not derived from the elemental energies of the inner or material plane, but from their mental command over reality itself. Their origins are conflicting, their ambitions and intent mysterious. They are the inheritors of Sardior, the ruby dragon. Theirs are the wonders of the mind, the force of will, the brilliant light of insight, and the resounding echo of discovery, but also the desiccation of despair. I am William Stark.
I am Omar Timsaw.
And this is D&D Legends and Lore. Gem dragons are majestic and powerful dragons with crystalline scales that match the gemstone the dragons are named for, of which there are 5 types: amethyst, emerald, sapphire, crystal, and topaz. There are also a few outlier gem-named dragons such as the obsidian or moonstone dragons, but we will not be covering these outlier gem dragons this episode. Gem dragons are notably reclusive creatures, dwelling in out-of-the-way places. Most gem dragons live in the inner or outer planes, and the ones that dwell in the material plane make their homes in far-flung, uninhabited regions, and in most cases are not too receptive to unexpected visitors. More so than their metallic and chromatic cousins, gem dragons are a subcategory of dragons defined by their cognitive abilities and prowess more so than their physical might or majesty. All are psionically powerful, although to most observers their psychic talents are indistinguishable from sorcery. They spend their lives honing their psionics in different ways, as well as cultivating their mental prowess, knowledge, and intellect. Though not all gem types share all these qualities, gem dragons are noted for their insatiable curiosity, their fascination with the nature of reality, their intense inquisitiveness, and their individual obsessions. It is due to this, along with reasons tied to their origins assigned to them in 5e D&D specifically, that gem dragons are usually the most likely among dragonkind to develop the power of dragon sight. We covered this in our Lore of Dragons episode, but for the sake of completeness, we will cover it here as well. Occasionally, dragons develop a sense known as dragon sight, an awareness of multiple incarnations of themselves across different worlds of the material plane. Dragons who develop dragon sight amass knowledge that spans the material plane, making them among the foremost experts on worlds beyond their own. With time, dragon sight can expand beyond passive awareness to allow active communication between a dragon's incarnations. Some ancient dragons with well-developed dragon sight begin to weave grand plans that involve coordinating activities across multiple worlds, culminating in cosmos-shaking events. The gem dragons in particular have a species-wide fascination with their parallel dimension incarnations. Despite their previously noted reclusiveness, gem dragons are famed for their suave charisma and masterfully manipulative communication techniques. They delight in riddling talk and seek to entrap the creatures they encounter by charming them with their words. Though they tend to be of neutral alignment with respect to good and evil, many gem dragons are quite egotistic and tend to be less than favorable company to most. And let us not forget that despite their natural high-mindedness and social acuity, gem dragons are still dragons through and through. And like all dragons, gem dragons are incredibly covetous and love to hoard. They hoard wealth, collecting mounds of coins. Being named after precious and semi-precious stones, they are especially fond of gems and jewelry, gathering as many as possible. Those with large hoards have a tendency to become paranoid and even more reclusive than they already are, venturing out of their lairs only to patrol the immediate area or to get food. And there is never enough treasure. It is pleasing to look at, and they bask in its radiance. They like to make beds of their hoards, shaping nooks and mounds to fit their bodies. By the time a gem dragon matures to their ancient stage, hundreds of gems and coins are embedded in its hide. So before we get into the specifics of the 5 major gem dragons, it's time we talk about their deity. While the metallic dragons view Bahamut as their lord and father, and chromatic dragons view Tiamat as their mother and queen, gem dragons follow the first of their own kind, Sardior, the ruby dragon. Sardior has 2 different origins, 5e and everything before 5e. This is not uncommon in the lore of Dungeons & Dragons. With the coming of a new edition often comes paradigm-shifting agendas and visions. Such is the nature of multiple canons that extend so far back as the settings and worlds of D&D. This will not be the last time I need to preface with this disclaimer. So let us start at the beginning and work our way forward to the newest of Sardior's origins. Many have heard the tales of legendary dragons such as Tiamat and Bahamut, but few have heard of Sardior. Also known as Master of the Gem Dragons and the Prince of Neutral Dragons, Sardior is a unique ruby dragon. It is said that he dwells in a magical castle that roams the night sky high up in the atmosphere. He keeps his castle moving so that it is always in Earth's shadow. Often, when Sardior's castle is sighted, sages think they are seeing a reddish star make an unusual conjunction with other stars in the night sky. Sardior is worshipped by neutral dragons, scions, and psychic warriors. Even though he is the master of the gem dragons in reality, he does not require much from them, and he does not try to guide their decisions. The gem dragons in return look up to him as an ideal and strive to be more like him. Sardior just wants to learn more. The more you know, the better off you will be, but just learning for learning's sake is not what Sardior stresses. Gaining knowledge should not just be reading from books. The trick for Sardior is to get someone else to read the book, then tell him all about it. He also has a fondness for gems of all kinds, but especially rubies. In his natural form, Sardior is a long, sinewy dragon covered with deep ruby red scales. At a distance, he might be mistaken for an ancient red worm, but the playful expression seen in his eyes makes him very much unlike the reds. He is also known to be a great conversationalist, and the unguarded had best prepare for his sharp wit. Sardior keeps a court of 5 thanes, one of each of the various breeds of gem dragons. Their names are Alethalithos, Amethyst Dragon, Crodal, Crystal Dragon, Smargad, Emerald Dragon, Charisma, Sapphire Dragon, Tithonus, Topaz Dragon. Sardior once had a 6th thane, Cerades, a female obsidian dragon, but he destroyed her and banished the obsidian dragons from his court. None know the cause of this banishment. Even his own clergy argue the reason behind this decision. Sardior has few clergy and even fewer temples. Temples dedicated to him tend to be located in high areas with clear views of the night sky and close to a community of some sort. Most gem dragons keep a ruby on a small pedestal in their lairs as a shrine to him. Many seek out the clergy of Sardior as sources of knowledge, and most of the clergy could be considered sages on various subjects. The temple gains its wealth from the charges of these services. Fizban's Treasury of Dragons from the 5th and most current edition of Dungeons & Dragons offers a very different alternative to this previous lore with the introduction of an ancient poem known as the Elegy for the First World. This ancient draconic writing depicts a different telling of the birth of the material plane, one where the primordial twin dragons Bahamut and Tiamat existed first and created the first material plane known as the First World. This poem also differs from nearly all other legends in its mention of Sardior, firstborn of dragonkind. The poem suggests that Bahamut and Tiamat created Sardior together as their child, and that ruby-red Sardior then joined with Bahamut to create the metallic dragons, and with Tiamat to craft the chromatic dragons. Some dragons who have studied the poem believe that Sardior was destroyed and shattered along with the First World, and that the ruby dragon's splintered consciousness became the gem dragons on the new worlds of the material plane. A central tenet of followers dedicated to his worship is that a reborn Sardior will ultimately inspire Bahamut and Tiamat to join forces once again and return to the task of creation. Many are gem dragons who believe Sardior's fractured consciousness is embedded in their own minds and who work to cultivate dragonsight in other gem dragons. However, even chromatic and metallic members of the group revere the long-dead ruby dragon. Sardior is their once and future sovereign, a leader who has departed for a time, but who will return to bring enlightenment, comfort, and salvation to dragonkind.
I once sought life advice from an amethyst dragon who specialized in that sort of thing. I told her all my flaws and unwanted behaviors, and she prescribed the best elixir. Stop doing those things. I still think back on that visit in trying times. Fizban.
So now it is time to give a brief overview of the 5 major gem dragons. Let us begin with the mightiest of gem dragon kind. Amethyst dragons, the mightiest of the gem dragons. Amethyst dragons are honorable, regal creatures. They inhabit the mountains, living on the shores of isolated lakes and pools at the higher altitudes, though some have been reported to make their homes in hollowed-out spaces on the elemental plane of Earth or in remote caverns deep in the earth of the material plane. These caverns can consist of many passages and chambers resplendent with crystals of all colors. At birth, these dragons have lavender skin with fine, translucent purple scales. These scales darken as the creature grows older, eventually reaching a sparkling lavender color. Amethyst dragons are wise and regal. They approach life with a detached, neutral air. This leads most to completely ignoring the conflicts of good and evil, law and chaos. At best, they see the conflicts as petty squabbles over inconsequential points of view, and not worthy of their time or consideration, while others, in their deep neutrality, see themselves as the ultimate unbiased arbiters. These sometimes serve as intermediaries between warring dragons or even humanoid civilizations. Regardless, Amethyst dragons spend much of their time studying and psionically manipulating the fundamental principles of the multiverse, from the force of gravity to the emanations of the outer planes. Their innate psionics give them a measure of control over how physical laws affect them. They defy gravity with flight that doesn't rely solely upon their great wings, and gravitational force empowers both their devastating breath weapon and the exploding amethyst crystals they spit at their foes. Amethyst dragons often collect crystals and gems, particularly their namesake stones, in raw, polished, or cut forms. They have less interest in coins and precious metals, although many have a fascination with metal items that have a silvery finish. Amethyst dragons favor treasures with particular scholarly or philosophical value as a part of their hoard, including fine books, scrolls, and carved tablets, tapestries or woven tomes of embroidered cloth, complex scientific instruments, and religious icons or objects. They are fond of unique and unusual art objects, especially those connected to far-off or long-lost cultures, other planes of existence, or other worlds, and of magic items that allow movement between those planes or worlds. The odd spatial nature of an amethyst dragon's lair can sometimes cause items to transpose between one dragon's horde and the hordes of the dragon's echoes, allowing for treasures with a surprising range of origins. These majestic dragons consider themselves to be the leaders of the gem dragons, and most of the lesser gem dragons acquiesce to this leadership.
I had a crystal dragon read my fortune once. A lot of codswallop and poppycock, to be sure. Except for the part where he said I'd forget what he told me. That was impressively accurate. Fizban.
Shimmering with radiant energy and brimming with life, crystal dragons enjoy an innate psionic connection to the positive plane that suffuses their bodies as well as their personalities with light. Though they prefer to live in desolate, frigid regions and even the elemental plane of air, many of them are among the friendliest of dragonkind, nurturing and optimistic. When they hatch, crystal dragons have dull gray scales with a few white or clear crystalline points, allowing the wormlings to blend into rocky terrain in the face of danger. As they age, their scales turn snow white, then slowly fade to transparency. The oldest crystal dragons have scales of perfect clarity that bend and refract light, sometimes making them difficult to see clearly. Moonlight and starlight can cause them to be luminescent, and full sunlight lends them a dazzling brilliance. The friendliest of gem dragons, crystal dragons, spend much of their time learning about the world around them. They value friendship over all else, and their treasures tend to be sentimental rather than valuable. They welcome visitors who come to them with good intentions. Fun-loving and mischievous, crystal dragons tend to be irresponsible rulers. For the daily running of their domains, these dragons rely on their vassals to keep things going. They establish domains in the cold, open northern reaches, building castles out of snow and ice. They leave these castles open to the sky, for they love to watch the stars on clear, cold nights. White dragons and crystal dragons sometimes come into conflict. Crystal dragons have been known to make off with the white dragon's eggs, possibly to foster the white wormlings and help them grow into friendlier dragons than they would otherwise become. Such white dragons are extremely rare. Crystal dragons tend to bear enmity toward any local giants, since the latter occasionally join forces with white dragons to hunt for crystal dragon layers or wormlings. Crystal dragons covet bright, opulent objects, baubles and trinkets that remind them of the stars, sky, sun, or heavens, and relics that aid in the divinatory arts. They prioritize beauty over value, so while they adore gemstones of all kinds, they prize fine quartz as highly as cut diamonds. Crystal dragons enhance the natural beauty of their layers with the treasures they collect, always trying to display those items they consider most precious in a tasteful and interesting way, and recounting their elaborate histories to visitors whenever possible. Indeed, crystal dragons also see amassing such wonderful hoards as a way to attract new friends to the remote locations they inhabit. Crystal dragons breathe radiant light.
Although emerald dragons are wise beyond telling, they usually answer questions with some vague jibber-jabber like, "The answer lies within you." Frustrating. Fizban.
Emerald dragons are the most curious, cunning, and manipulative of the gem dragons, wielding psionic power to weave illusions to deceive and disorient. They cloak their own presence so they can observe other creatures without being discovered as they collect information on everything from local cultural practices to supernatural occurrences. The scales of a wormling emerald dragon are translucent and sea green. As it ages, its scales harden and take on every shade of green from deep emerald to mint, and they scintillate in even the dimmest light. An emerald dragon's pupils fade as it ages, so by the time it becomes a great worm, its eyes are featureless, glowing green orbs. Emerald dragons live among the tropical islands. They are a curious species, taken to keeping track of history, lore, and customs. Often their knowledge of these particular areas surpasses that of the best sage. However, these dragons are also rather paranoid, so developing even a passing acquaintance with one can be quite difficult. They tend to be very reclusive, suspicious that others covet their treasure hoards and territory. A desire for privacy runs through the Emerald clans, going so far as to determine where the Dragon Lords and their spawn establish lairs. The emerald dragons have been known to build their domains around active volcano ranges and other dangerous terrain in tropical areas that can deter would-be trespassers. Emerald dragons are unusual among gem dragons in their preference for coinage over gemstones when amassing treasure. They are fascinated by the various designs of coinage and often strive to collect rare mintages. Most emerald dragons can precisely enumerate the names, amounts, and denominations of every bit of currency in their hoards. Emerald dragons also prize cultural artifacts, especially relics with historical significance. They place great importance on an item's provenance, which can make it difficult to gauge how they might value any particular object. Despite remaining unmoved by the loss of a gold scepter deemed to be a replica, an emerald dragon might become enraged at the theft of a clay mug known to have been used by a legendary dwarf warlord while on campaign. Emerald dragons breathe psychic dissonance.
A sapphire dragon's flight once inspired a courting dance in a certain kingdom that shall remain nameless. Embarrassingly, it is still performed to this day. Fizban.
Of all dragon kind, perhaps the sapphire dragon clans are the most militaristic. The thunderous clash of conflict is part of the very nature of sapphire dragons. Militant and territorial, they defend their lairs fiercely, ambushing intruders and plotting assaults against their rivals. They fervently protect their territory from outsiders, going so far as to distrust anyone who even gets close to their borders. They work to keep their vassals in peak fighting condition. A sapphire dragon's scales and wing membranes show varied shades of blue, ranging from light tones of a spring sky to the rich crystalline azure of sapphire gems and compressed glacial ice. They scintillate in any light, creating a cascade of ghostly glints on the walls of the caverns in which these creatures often lair. Unlike the scales of other gem dragons, those of a sapphire dragon do not change as the creature ages. Its pupils fade with time, however, so by the time it becomes a great worm, its eyes are featureless glowing sapphire orbs. A sapphire dragon's psionic nature is evident in the horn and bone structures of their bodies. Their tail barbs and horn tips are all separate pieces, but they float in place, held aloft by psychic energy while the dragons live. These levitating horns and spines shift slightly with the dragon's mood, bobbing in amusement or flaring with anger. Sapphire dragons tend to control subterranean domains, either on the elemental plane of Earth or in areas of the material plane. As most of the territory that interests the sapphire clans is below the ground, they rarely come into conflict with other dragon clans, unless they attempt to take caverns currently in use. Sapphire dragons tend to be antisocial toward all beings, but they view the evil races of the Underdark as particular enemies and sometimes come into direct conflict with them over underground territory. These dragons don't go in for small talk unless the discussion revolves around military strategy, a subject on which they consider themselves experts, if not geniuses. In fact, a sapphire dragon may forgive visitors their presence if they offer it a game of strategy. Of course, it is never wise to let the dragon lose. A sapphire dragon often allows large monstrous spiders to roam its lair, but only as a handy food source. Sapphire dragons breathe pulsing thunder.
A topaz dragon named Blustertail once complained to me that he hated water, because it talked too much, whatever that means. Fizban.
Decay and despair are bound up in the nature of topaz dragons, thanks to the necrotic energy of the negative plane that suffuses them. Their psionic power manifests the fundamental entropic principle that mortal beings and their creations are ultimately doomed to death and decomposition, and the dragon's demeanor is typically morbid and curmudgeonly as a result. A topaz wormling's scales are dull yellow with orange highlights. As it ages, its color slowly brightens until its individual scales become scarcely visible. From a distance, the creature looks as if it had been sculpted from pure topaz. A topaz dragon's pupils fade as it ages, so by the time it becomes a great worm, its eyes resemble glowing orbs of fire. Topaz dragons tend to be unfriendly and selfish. While not malicious, topaz dragons are not the best of company or particularly pleasant to deal with. Besides caring little for social graces, They display erratic behavior that is unsettling and very confusing. They dislike visitors, but tend to avoid combat if they can help it. If combat is unavoidable, they use tricks and promises to distract their foes before striking with teeth and claws. Topaz dragons inhabit coastal regions and temperate islands, building layers below the waterline, though constructing them so they remain dry. Others make their homes on the elemental plane of water. Clannish and self-seeking, these gem dragons usually want little to do with the other inhabitants of their region. These dragons love to lounge on outcroppings that are lashed by waves and wind-blasted sea spray. Of course, such vantages also allow them to spot passing prey, such as sharks and large squids. Because they inhabit similar territories, topaz dragons and bronze dragons often come into conflict. While topaz dragons enjoy the feel of sea wind and spray on their faceted scale hides, they do not particularly like water. They swim to hunt, attack, or reach their lairs, but not for the enjoyment. They do love to eat fish and other sea creatures though, especially tasty giant squids. Topaz dragons breathe necrotic energy. This has been D&D Legends and Lore. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by leaving a like and comment below. I would be particularly interested in hearing suggestions for future topics for the show. And if you would like to see more narrative-driven, zoomed-in perspectives on stories that D&D's decades of lore have to offer, make sure to subscribe. You can also find us on Spotify, iTunes, and anywhere else podcasts can be found. Links will be in the description. Lastly, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can gain access to early, ad-free episodes as well as live play and homebrew D&D content. With that, I will say thank you for listening and happy adventuring.